Hi, it's Annika. I am out of breath. First of all, I'm out of breath, and I am at a bristlecone. What is it called? Bristlecone National Forest or something like that? I don't know. It's the oldest trees, in fact, the oldest living beings on Earth. This is I'm close to Methuselah Grove, which I love the name. Methuselah was the oldest man recorded in the Bible. And I wasn't going to do a video, but and I didn't bring my tripod, so it's going to be a little bumpy, me holding the camera. But it's just too beautiful here to pass up this opportunity. And I should have caught my breath first, but um, I like the conversation or the topic that's been really burning on my mind is like the triggers versus harm thing. I feel like there's just this loose end about like what is the actual difference between triggers and harm. Like both of the words are being used all the time, like all over the place. I mean, people are always talking about being triggered or like this is causing harm, this is harmful. So we use trigger and harm all the time, but I rarely, if ever, see any kind of definition of what exactly is a trigger and what exactly is harm and how are they different. And so this is my take on how triggers and harm are different. So first of all, both of them hurt. Both of them are followed by a lot of pain. But the difference is that harm causes fresh pain. So when I harm somebody, I cause them a fresh injury, whether it's a physical injury, a social injury, or a emotional, psychological, or spiritual injury. I somehow injure them in a way that they were not previously injured. So I cause fresh, not just hurt, but like fresh injury. And then the hurt and the pain is a result of that fresh injury. A trigger is the revealing or the being put in touch with an injury and the resulting pain of that injury that was already there. So the analogy that I use for myself is in the physical realm. If someone cuffs me, like on the shoulder, they're like, hey, something like that. Whether it's in jest or whether it's actually meant to cause a little bit of pain, like they're angry or something and they kind of want me to like, hey, and I kind of get like punched. Like the pain that comes from that is a harm. And it might be like such a small harm that it's like, I don't care. I'll laugh it off. I'm like, ow, like what'd you do that for? So it could be like among friends. It could, like it could cause a little, like just like a tiny amount of harm that like I'm not heartbroken over, or that I'm just like, that's fine, that I can laugh off. Or of course, if somebody punched me harder, then it would be like, hey, like that was not okay. What did you harm me for? What did you do that for? What did you hurt me, injure me for? And I might even walk away with a bruise. So say somebody does punch me harder, and I do end up with a bruise. And then someone else comes, so that would be harm, right? And someone else comes along and they punch me in the exact same spot that I have a bruise. It's gonna hurt a lot. So even if they like maybe bump into me or just like touch me lightly, like to get my attention, and they're not, like it would ordinarily not cause any harm at all, but it triggers the pain of that injury. And so now I'm hurting because that bruise was already there, and this non-harmful touch ended up triggering the pain that was stored inside of that old injury, and it re-triggered that pain. So like now I'm feeling it again. So that's kind of in the physical realm, and in the emotional, psychological, or spiritual realm, it's a similar thing, where if someone betrays my trust or insults me intentionally, or just does something to hurt my feelings, that's a harm. That's a fresh injury. Somebody's angry with me or for whatever reason, they make the choice to cause me emotional harm. Uh, However, there's also triggers where somebody will say something that is not intended to cause me any harm. It's not intended to cause an injury at all, but it just so happens to land on that spot inside emotionally that has a bruise. Or maybe even worse, maybe a gaping wound. Maybe it's like an open, like like an open festering wound that I'm dissociated from, and I don't even know it's there. I've disconnected from it, the same way that I can disconnect from a physical wound. Say, I'm in the middle of nowhere right now. If I were to, heaven forbid, I don't plan on doing this, but if I were to like trip and fall on this hike, and I had a gash on my leg, there is no one here to help me right now. So if I were to injure myself, my body would shield me from some of that pain, because survival is more important than protecting the injury, right? And so I would like stumble down to the parking lot, like on maybe even a broken leg, or like at least a very injured leg. My body would throw everything at my ability to get back to safety, and where there's help and support and resources, before I would feel the full impact of the pain, and then would stay off of that leg. So it's the same with our emotional bodies, that we don't, like when we're still in survival mode, and parts of us are, like every traumatized part of the self is still in survival mode, because it still lives back in the time when the trauma occurred, when survival was not guaranteed. And there were not resources to actually move through the experience and stay present with it. And so those parts they still live in a survival state. And so it's possible for us to move and not notice that these grave injuries exist until somebody points at them. So in the physical metaphor or example, if I had an injured leg, I dragged myself down to the parking lot, and maybe I have like additional injuries that I wasn't even aware of. My more small injuries, like maybe, I braced myself falling and scraped my wrist or something, or my elbow, and I'm not feeling anything, because, the other injuries are more serious, and getting to safety is so much more serious. So I don't even know that I have this scrape on my elbow, and that my elbow is bleeding. And if I get to the parking lot and, I end up finding someone to help, and they start administering first aid and whatnot, and then they point at my elbow and go like, "Oh, your shirt is bleeding, like your elbow is bleeding," and they may remove the shirt and bring attention to it, and I look at my elbow, guess what? Suddenly it's like, ow! I start to feel the pain. And it's not like that injury wasn't there before, right? I just wasn't aware of it. I didn't feel it. And so a lot of triggers are like that. They point us to an emotional or psychic, psychological, spiritual injury that we had not yet felt, and we didn't even know it existed at all. But, because there now is more safety, because this is more common the safer we are, because there are more resources, because there is more support from other people, we start to feel wounds that we had no idea even existed. And then it's really, really easy to make that mistake of thinking that that wound was caused by the person who pointed it out to us and started the pain. It's not so easy to do, physically, obviously. If I come down from this hike and I get some first aid people supporting me, I'm not going to assume that if I have an additional bleeding spot on my body that they caused it, that would be crazy. I will assume that I just didn't realize it and it happened on the fall on my hike. But when it comes to emotions, it's much easier to make that mistake and to think that the person who is actually trying to be supportive, or is just minding their own business and ended up triggering some wound we didn't know about, actually caused that wound. And so then it's likely to be lashing out over a trigger, mistaking it for harm. The other thing is that triggers and harm often do occur together. And so that makes it a lot more complicated, but that's a topic for another day. Because I'm going to get off of all of this talk about physical injuries and hikes. I'm kind of like, it's getting late. The sun's going to set and it's going to get really, really, really cold up here. I think it's going to be like 16 degrees tonight up here. So all of that talk makes me want to get down to the parking lot, even though it's gorgeous up here. So we'll have to... I'll have to get back to the triggers and harm occurring at the same time, but that's just some of my thoughts about the difference between triggers and harm. And thank you for virtually joining me here at the oldest living beings in the world. It's amazing. Bye.